Thank you very much, Frank. Just to make one comment, if I can, on the prior discussion. Boeing is having serious problems with a lithium-ion battery that they say they tested the hell out of. It was in today's Wall Street Journal. If you aren't even sure about your lithium-ion batteries, imagine what the problem might be with your nukes. So just as a, oh, by the way kind of comment. It's good to be here talking about sequestration for obvious reasons, but another one. What we're talking about happening to defense is truly a man-made disaster. All right? To err may be human, but to really screw things up takes the political system, and we've done that in spades. When we're talking about what happens in March, and I want to go not just March 1st, but March, we're talking about a number of things going on. There is sequestration on the 1st. There is the end of the continuing resolution, or the extension, more likely, of the continuing resolution for the rest of the year. We're coming up soon after that with another round on the debt ceiling. We have the 2014 budget, which now is in limbo, and if sequestration hits, gets tossed out, has to be redone. There's a quadrennial defense review coming up that has to be worked on this year, which people expect now to respond to sequestration and the CR. There is the next round of the future year defense plans, the POM, et cetera, et cetera. So you have this massive sort of set of confluence of events, laws, and all the rest, all of which are sort of driving defense, frankly, into the ground. In addition, let's be clear in terms of the implication. We're not just talking about what happens to U.S. defense in isolation. Right? There's the external context, if I can use that. Growing threats. I mean, I don't think anybody can argue that the world has, in the last year, 5 years, even 10 years, become a simpler, easier, quieter, safer place. North Korea, we were just talking about. The reports about China now testing its DF-21 ship killer in Mongolia. The kind of systems the Iranians are buying, air-to-surface surface-to-air, rather, anti-aircraft missiles being now spread from Syria to Lebanon, from Libya to Egypt, on and on. The list goes on and on and on and on. At the same time, most of our allies, with a couple of exceptions, are spending less. NATO is within a hair's breadth of going out of business as an alliance, all right? The average spending is below 2% of GDP. We're around 4%, even excluding the OCO funding. At 2% or less, you cannot do anything in terms of a modern military, and they're all discovering this. There was a meeting that Secretary Bennett attended in which the Secretary General of NATO basically begged everybody to hold the line on spending. It was rather sad in its own way. Without spending, all the things we're talking about, smart defense, collaborative forces stuff is just meaningless. You don't have the equipment. You don't have the capabilities. I would point out to you that with all the discussion about buying enablers and all the rest, the French could not move the equivalent of a reinforced battalion, the U.S. MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, okay, into Mali without us. Couldn't have run their tactical fighter operations from next door in Chad without us. And if our forces go down, theirs sort of go away for all intents and purposes. We were just talking about fewer nukes. One of the premises early on in looking at stabilizing and reducing U.S. nuclear forces was the notion of conventional superiority. Didn't need them as much. We had all this conventional stuff. We're now getting rid of the nukes, or at least the argument is, and we're going to reduce the conventional forces. Doesn't exactly leave you with much. If you wanted to get rid of the conventional forces, you could do what the Russians are doing. Rely on nukes. We've done it before. It wasn't a great idea, but you could do it again. But what do you do if you get rid of both? What's left out of this? And then there's just a general proposition, which is what happens to the world when there is less U.S. power, less U.S. presence, less U.S. involvement? Don't know. It's been a long time since that happened. But of course, if you want to look at the world, it wasn't exactly pretty the last time either. All right, so you have this kind of problem. Let me spend very little time really on, unless we can do questions if you want, on kind of the financials of the CR and sequestration. This year, and I don't want to limit to this year, the real problem is more in the continuing resolution than it is in sequestration. Why is that? Because the continuing resolution denies the department the ability to move money around. So you have, for example, in the Army, billions of dollars in shortfall in O&M and a lot of money in certain procurement accounts. They can't swap them around. The other thing you have with the way this is all set up is you can't do new starts. You can't do multi-years. So a lot of things you would do to either move the process along, save money. Multi-years are a great thing for saving money. V-22, DDG-51 destroyers, the next multi-year on the Virginia-class submarine, great program that's managed to cut like $1 billion per boat out of the cost. We're going to have all those costs go up. At the same time, the money's coming down. Because of the way the CR in particular is written, the costs go up for those same programs. You know, you couldn't kind of plan to do it in a worst possible way, I think, if you tried. In addition, on sequestration, one of the problems is, there are two problems. One is we're already 5 months into the year. And frankly, if we kick it down the road for another 2 months, rather than just getting rid of it for the year, if you were going to sort of look for alternatives, it wouldn't help you. It actually would make the situation worse, right? Because for many of the accounts, you've been spending money. Most of these accounts have been spending near kind of to the standard rate, you know, 1/12 every month. So you now come to a situation in which in the last 7 months, you have to take on sequestration the entire hit. The nominal case, for example, O&M funding, about $200 billion nominally, according to Deputy Secretary Carter. But when you look at either what's excluded or where the money's been spent, what's left to take that cut is only $125 billion. You've spent, you know, 5/12 of the money, basically. So whatever the percentage is that you have to get out of that, which is essentially specified in law, it has to be equal across all the programs and elements, now gets taken on a lower base, which means it's magnified. Whereas over all the programs, for the entire year, it's about an 8.5%, 9% cut on sequestration. On top of that, you have about a $10 billion cut due to the CR, because the difference between the 2012 spending level and what we wanted to spend in 2013, all right? But it's about an 18% cut in O&M. And there are a number of programs where it's in the 20s. So, you know, programs that have experienced in 1 year 20, 25% cut really begin to sort of have problems managing themselves. The Army has said, you can sort of take it with a bit of grain of salt, 21 of their 26 major acquisition programs will experience a Nunn-McCurdy breach. For those of you who don't know, Nunn-McCurdy breach comes when you have a 15% increase in the price per unit. Now, why does that happen? Well, because essentially, if I've got units to buy and less money, you know, you can sort of do what the math looks like. So you're essentially going to have all these programs where you cannot match the funds to what you want to do. And so they're looking for massive problems. Military assistance overseas. It looks very much like the plan to increase assistance to the Israeli missile defense programs will not be done under the current situation between the CR and sequestration. There are kind of a few alternatives, but frankly, none of them are particularly good. I mean, even if you give people transfer authority, really all the transfer authority allows you to do is move the passengers from one side of the Titanic to the other side of the Titanic. It really does not help save people. So we can talk about that, but the reality is a cut is a cut is a cut. I would make one other point on this, which is since the end of the Cold War, we took the military down by about half. The use rate, if you measured in terms just of named deployments, about 480 of them in the last, 20 years. Named deployments, you know, can involve like a battalion or a squadron or a MU, going out and doing something, not just steaming around, but actually going someplace to do something. Over 400 of them in the last 20 years. That rate went up fourfold. So if you think about the calculation, I've got a force half as large, doing 4 times as much, which puts sort of a use rate, a stress rate of 8-fold on that force. And now you're going to try and cut that back without making any kind of change to strategy or policy. And that's really where I want to sort of, kind of, if you will, end or focus my remarks in the last few minutes here. What we have seen in the last month as the kind of details, the horror story of CR and sequestration came out, I think is evidence that the 65-year-old bipartisan consensus on national security, U.S. role in the world, importance of U.S. military power is busted. When the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff can say in testimony at the House Armed Services Committee, if you want us to continue doing what we are doing, not $1 more in cuts, and got basically almost no reaction. That consensus is busted. Now, we can argue about why and who's to blame. It doesn't really matter. It's busted. It didn't come first over arguments about taxes and spending and all the rest. All right? So, what needs to happen in this context, after we've finished fighting out whether or not we're going to have these reductions, I think in any case, there needs to be a replacement. This is a symptom, if you want to call it that. The fact that we could put something as crazy as sequestration out there, that the White House could propose it, and that the Congress, particularly the Republican side of it, could accept it, I think is a fundamental private safety evidence that they've lost the bubble, the majority of them, or enough of them at least. The leadership certainly has. So the question for a group like this is, what replaces it? And do you really want to leave it up to the administration to define what replaces it? I think the answer is no. I don't know that we have to come up with the answer right here and now, but I think you can challenge the administration. For example, go back to the national security, the new defense strategy that was written, what, just a little over a year ago. That was a list of 10 missions, all interesting missions. Ask them, what mission would you give up? You're not going to do conventional deterrence or conventional warfighting? You're not going to do counterterrorism? You're not going to do nuclear deterrence, which we were just talking about? How about giving up support to civil authorities in natural disasters in the United States? That's a good one. I think we can all agree we shouldn't do that anymore, right, and pay the price. Another way of asking the question, and I think this one would embarrass the hell out of me, which region do you want to give up? All right, we're down to one carrier in the Persian Gulf area. We're taking, I don't remember, I mean, it's not the Stennis, but one of them, Washington, I think. We're turning it around after 2 months in harbor and sending it back out again because we're trying to juggle the availability. Right? I mean, you're going to have, if you just look at the kind of availabilities, things that aren't being done, ships and planes that have to be tied up. Each of the services put together just glorious, ugly charts to scare the bejesus out of everybody on this. But there's some truth to it. If you really want to do this, right? We'll tie up ships, then we'll sell them for scrap, we'll get rid of the airplanes, we'll fire people. All right, so what region do you not want to be in? Pick one. Middle East? Well, that sounds like a good idea. How about Asia? You know, the economic center of the world for the next couple of hundred years. But I think it's a question that the administration needs to answer. Okay, the force can come down, it's not a big deal, you're willing to see that happen, it was your idea. What region do you want to go out? Last time country pulled that stunt, the UK, 1970, 72, right? Pulled everything out east of Suez, famous sort of story. For those of you who don't know, this wasn't a strategic decision. It was a run on the pound. It was a sterling crisis, right? So you now think about what the Fed is doing and printing money. What happens if there's a run on the dollar, right? You have to essentially cut the budget, put the money into higher interest payments, all the rest, right? So it's the equivalent. What region do you want to get up? Do we pull east of Suez? All right, let's even say we do. Ask the administration the third question. Who takes our place? Who fills the vacuum? Are they going to be countries that share our interests, share our goals? Are they going to protect our interests? Would they simply protect American tourists that end up being threatened by a local regime? Do we trust the Chinese to protect our interests in Asia? Do we trust the Iranians to protect our interests in the Persian Gulf? Do we trust the Russians to protect our interests in Europe? Right? Those are the kind of questions I think we need to be asking. And then there's really kind of the bottom line, which is, how much are you willing to pay for the military? Let me close with this point. We have a very expensive military. It is expensive because we chose to build it that way. Right? We chose to have technological superiority over our adversaries. The reason you buy B-2s rather now than B-52s, F-35s, F-22s rather than F-15s and 16s is because they're better airplanes. The reason you have a Virginia submarine rather than what came before is it's better than the other guys, and therefore you're going to win the fight. It is an all-volunteer military. It is now a largely married military with family, and we have chosen to take very good care of our military personnel. You've had military health care grow by over 100% in the last decade. And that's not because the cost was going up. That's one factor. The main reason is we expanded eligibility hugely. And in part because you have all kinds of people who are military retirees who are double dipping. That is, they have a second job in the private sector, but rather than going on the private sector's health plan and raising the private company's health plan, and raising their costs, they're maintaining their TRICARE. There's nothing wrong with that. They're legally allowed to do that, but it adds to the burden that is paid for by the Defense Department. So it's all volunteer, it's technologically sophisticated. By the way, we have more lawyers in the U.S. military than half a dozen NATO member countries have infantry. Think about that for a minute. There's a good reason for that, right? We want to have every strike that goes down and every terrorist that gets caught, you know, all covered by the law. But it costs money, huge amounts of money. Right? It's also a power projection military. If it was just a military that stayed here at home, it'd be coastal artillery like you see at Charleston and some of these other old forts, you know, Fort McHenry up here, you know, and a militia. Could do that. Be real cheap. But if we want to go anywhere and do anything, that costs a lot more. Huge amount. That's why you have 200 and something transport aircraft. That's why you have 600 aerial tankers. Because from getting from here to there is phenomenally difficult, and we're the only ones who can do it. So if you like what the military has done in general, its availability, its responsiveness, its characteristics, if you like the fact that we think we can rely on it to win wars, support civil agencies, yada, 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 then the only question is, are you going to pay for it? And let me end on that point.
Dan, thank you. That was superb, as always. Are there questions or comments for Dan? I had a couple of my own. Go ahead.
Some have proposed giving the administration more discretion as to how to allocate the cuts within the Defense Department. I was just wondering whether you thought there were any possible problems with that, such as the administration sort of allocating money away from the types of weaponry or programs that it doesn't like?
You know, one can argue, let's put this up, right? One can argue that there ought to be discretion allowed based on the continuing resolution. That is, if we're going to have to rewrite it come March 27th, we ought to rewrite that for discretion, because that law is just a matter of can't pass a budget, just peg it at last year's and keep on going. That was not kind of a policy document. I would not allow them discretion if you're going to go with sequestration, which I don't agree with, but you know, if you sort of, if the decision is made that that's the only alternative to getting some kind of spending cuts, then frankly I wouldn't give them discretion on that side. Every element gets cut. Now, let me give you one point of that, by the way. So, we know what the game looks like. If CR continues and if sequestration goes through, we sort of know what the lay of the land, everybody's in the numbers. In fact, they did them probably 9 months ago and wouldn't release them. It's pretty obvious at this point. You know. The problem is not 2013. The problem is 2014, when the sky's the limit. So right now, for example, personnel are off the table. You can't cut people. You can furlough defense civilians. You're not touching military personnel, uniform personnel. That, though the personnel account is not sacrosanct, at least for the moment, in 2014. Infrastructure. Do we have a BRAC round in 2014? There's a lot of things that come up in 2014. If this goes forward, right, and if we're not going to make a change to that law, however you believe it, do it. Tax it, spend it, I don't, you know, doesn't matter to me. Then the thought ought to shift to two things. What's the argument about strategy? Because you're taking this major cut in capability. And secondly, what happens to the 2014 budget and then the long-term defense program? Because that's, in fact, where the fight is going to be over programs. It's not this year. There's almost nothing you can do this year, right? In 7 months and all the rest, you know, you know, you could cancel something, but practically speaking, in terms of meeting the obligations, right? The only place you're getting money, right, in a budget is largely over current programs, which are sort of, the stuff is flowing through the factory, or O&M. So now go to 14, and I think that's the place where you want to watch the administration extraordinarily carefully.
Can you address the question of what Russia and China are doing with their military budgets, and also the question of how calculations are made by allies on theirs and ours on the marginal change? In other words, the marginal increase versus the marginal reduction, not just on the baseline.
Great question. China has now is like in its 12th year of double-digit increases in defense spending on the official budget, which is about 60–65% of what we think the real defense budget is going to be. In purchasing power parity terms, because of the lower costs and the fact they don't have lawyers in uniform pretty much, right, they're going to equal or surpass the United States in about, if we stayed on the old budget, in about 5 years. This now decreases, so in about 3 years, the Chinese will pass us in purchasing power parity, and they will pass us absolutely if the current trends continue. They're going up double-digit. We're coming down by sequestration, in other words, by the end of the decade. All right? They will spend more on defense with a lower cost basis in terms of the aggregate force, right, and all the infrastructure and all the costs that they have than we are. So, imagine what that means in terms of the ability to generate military power. The Russians, in fact, Putin has announced a massive program to increase military capabilities. And whether he's going to have the dollars to do it is a different question. They're going up, like in the nuclear area. We're the only ones not building nukes out of the nuclear powers. We are the only one of the major sort of superpower, regional power countries that is not putting more money into defense. In fact, this year, even the Japanese are putting more money into defense because they're running a little bit scared. Europeans are not, and they're about to sort of, frankly, as I said, go away as a military. But that doesn't sort of solve our problem, because if we have to hold their hands every time they want to send 2,000 soldiers to Mali, and that's by the way, it's not the case. If you talk to the people involved in that, General Wells, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, they're paying for that out of high. That's not OCO funding. That's coming out, the additional deployments to support European forces going into Mali is being paid for out of current Air Force operations. Okay, so just add that to the cost structure, the bill that's being paid as we take money away from the system.
I just wanted to ask you about the argument that Rand Paul has been making lately, which is basically the United States outspends like the next 10 most free spending countries, for want of a better term, on national defense. Can you just take that apart and just go over what the major fallacies are of that particular? Major
fallacies is none of the other 10 countries have global responsibilities or have chosen a global role, global interest, global responsibilities. Even the Chinese, keep to their own regional knitting. If you have to project power into multiple regions, it costs you a lot more than doing in one. Our military has, really since the end of the Cold War, argued that the standard is the ability to fight two near-simultaneous conventional wars at the same time. It's been slightly modified by this administration, but notice, only slightly. We're going to fight two, but we're only going to fight one to victory. The other one, we're just going to stop the aggression or impose costs. But it's still two wars, right? Nobody else is looking to two wars at the same time. We are. Why? Well, we've had history where we deployed forces because Saddam Hussein was doing something and the North Koreans started doing something. No administration, Republican or Democrat, in the last 20-something years has figured out a satisfying alternative to that standard. Right? We have an all-volunteer military. If you look at the Russians, the Chinese, many of the others, they do not. Even the Germans, for example, still run drafting. We have a deployable military. Most of the allies and things do not, even the ones who are our friends. Most of the military they have can't go anywhere, virtually all of our military. We also have a military we want to be operationally superior, with better training, and technologically superior. So we don't want to rest with fourth-generation aircraft when the Chinese are building fifth-generation aircraft. We'd rather be in fifth generation and moving to sixth. Why? Because two reasons. Otherwise, you have to have a lot more of them. Those people who say, let's kill the F-35 and just buy F-16s, F-15s, let me tell you, that's going to cost you more. Why? Because the numbers double or triple. It's less survivable. And it's not only the number of airplanes. I now have to have pilots, maintainers, airfields, spare parts, petrol, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time I figure out or I put together that force of less capable aircraft or ships or planes, it doesn't, tanks, it doesn't matter. It's going to be twice to three times the size. And in the process, you're going to get a whole bunch of Americans killed.
Anybody else? Ryan?
I believe we have 11 carriers around the world. Is that correct? And how many are at port? And I think our next closest ally would have, what, 2 or so?
Yeah, basically.
But, of course, they don't have the global reach. But what's the argument for 11? Because I've heard that one along the lines of the Rand Paul arguments. How do we respond to that?
Yeah, I'll give you a number of different responses. First of all, for every carrier you have deployed, you essentially have 3 back at home, right? One of them, it's 11 total. One is in long-term refit. We're about to put, I think the Abraham Lincoln is going in for a 4-year recall, right? Out of action for 4 years. So it's 10. If I want to have 1 in the Persian Gulf, 1 in the Far East, Mali or Libya, 1 in the Med, or 1 just for reinforcement purposes that can go out, that's 3. I got to have essentially my 9, all right? At least that minimum. So having 10 sort of gets you there. Another reason. When you look at how aircraft carriers operate, if you want to have 24/7 operations like we did during the various Gulf Wars, I need 3 together, minimum of 3 in a location. When we did the 2001 Operation Iraqi Freedom, we had, I believe it was 3 in the Arabian Sea and 3 in the Med. Why that number? Because I cannot run a carrier 24/7. Well, I could do it for a day or two, and then simply stops running. So I have them on essentially rotation. So I can have CAP or other operations or intelligence operations off the carrier at night, if I'm even operating during the day. So I run one essentially every sort of 8 hours or some kind of combination like that. So I now have to have, in a case of a real war, about 6 that are really capable of charging out. Well, 6 on a almost ready basis really require, and then 1 that's on long haul refit, and then I've got a bunch that are just coming off deployment. The guys have been out for 6 months or a year. They're tired. The latrines don't work. The heads, sorry for Navy people. There's sprung a leak. All got to be in repair. So you simply, sorry. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, and by the way, you can do it up to a point. Here's another question. Okay, that saves you money on the one hand. On the other hand, we all know what it costs to put people forward. You're going to close bases over here, but deploy more stuff overseas to foreign bases. Right? That's going to go over very well in this building. But so we do it for a reason. There's very little of this stuff that we don't have for a very good reason or set of reasons. The final one, of course, being that while we like having allies, and we need allies, and we deploy with allies, right, we don't depend on them for the critical operations. They come along with us. Right? It's our war, if you want to call it that, if we're going to be there. And therefore, we have to have the capability to do these things. Alone if we must, with others if we can. That sets the standard.
Preston?
Thank you very much. That was an excellent answer. Appreciate that. In a war, you deploy these aircraft carriers. One of them gets taken out.
Yeah.
You need to replace them. How long does it take to build one of these things?
That's a great question. Let me get at it slightly there. One of the things that you'll notice in what the military has proposed to do in response to sequestration is, to park things, to not do maintenance and all the rest. They are choosing, and I'm going to say, they won't admit to this, but I'm telling you, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military services, have chosen to go hollow. And we always talk about hollow being a bad thing, not compared to the alternative. What's the alternative? The alternative is you shrink the size of the force, you scrap the planes and ships, whatever, and then something bad happens in the world. It's a lot cheaper to reconstitute, put people back in the unit, refurbish the airplane, fuel in the ship, than it is to rebuild for that very reason, because it's going to take you, even if you got the money tomorrow, it's going to take you about a decade to build an additional carrier. Right? We have it's a 7-year schedule, but because everything is geared to that, really. If you had to put an additional one in the pot, try going out to, I guess, Babcock and Wilcox, whoever, and sort of order up the next reactor for that thing. It'll actually take you longer because we do it on such a slow rate. There is no more Liberty ship side of stuff. We're not going to produce 40 million tons of shipping in 2.5 years. We're over that game. What you see is what we will have.
Somebody famously said, you go to war with the army you have.
Liz.
And got ridiculed for it, which I never, frankly, could understand, because few things are more true. Can I just take the prerogative of the chair? I think we've exhausted everybody else's question. I have a couple of things that I just wanted to kick around with you, Dan. This is an excellent presentation, as always, and it really helped illuminate a number of things, not least your questions, the answers to the questions you received. You said at one point that the chiefs have scared the bejesus out of people with what they've presented. And yet, as you say, what they've done quite deliberately is try to preserve capability, even if it's not going to be ready. To what extent is this gamesmanship, and to what extent is it, doing as best they can with, frankly, what I'm convinced is the most irresponsible position we've ever put them in? I think I said to you when you were on our show the other day that I think of this as the most important business of the country, and we're conducting it in a way that no business in the country would voluntarily allow itself to be, operated. So talk about, this question that I think some on the Hill have suggested is real, or elsewhere advising the Hill have suggested is sort of scaremongering.
Well, actually, I would say it slightly differently. has the military been politicized? Which is, differentiating on the same point. The answer is, I think, yes. I'm a pro-military. I mean, this is not a matter of sort of, putting a thumb. And I think these people are, generally speaking, good people. But there's no question they've been politicized. Did they know what the situation was going to look like October 1st? I mean, you can do the calculation on a CR and know what it means. Here's the budget you got. Here's the demand you want. There's a delta of $6 billion. What does that mean? You can do it in the back of an envelope. They don't come up with the story until 2 weeks ago. Come on, right? So I think there's a huge politicization. The refusal to discuss this, pretty much. They claim they came up in the fall to tell the Hill this was bad stuff, but not in the same way. Or, for example, the way OSD refused to let the industry implement the Warren Act. Mm-hmm. Clearly, this was clearly political in this organization. So now they come in. The Army has this new, 50-state, item by item, district by district, tale of catastrophe. Where was that? What the hell is that all about? So I think, in a sense, it is scaremongering. Now, and some of that's self-serving. Okay, but it's clearly also, and even if it's self-serving, we're in a very dangerous place as a nation when the military becomes, or acts like, nothing more than another special interest. Now, it may feel forced to do that, which I think is the real political issue from the administration's point of view. It may feel trapped and forced to do so because, at the same time, you've told us to go out there and defend the world. So if I'm going to defend the world on the one hand, and you've put me in this position, well, hell, I have to lobby then in a particular way. But that's also, I think, a political problem. In a sense, we're at fault in major ways for having politicized this institution. And, when you politicize a military, unconsciously or consciously, right? That is very dangerous for democracy.
Can I ask you about the condition of the military and its supporting industrial base?
Sure. Great question.
You sort of implied at one point that, not implied, you said that we've been operating this in an expensive way, which is an all-volunteer force. Mm-hmm. Are we about to break it? And are we, whatever we do with the military itself, at a point now, Dan, where, as you will track at the Lexington Institute pretty carefully, the industrial base is really in a death spiral?
If you go and look at the history of it, we've had these cycles, up and down cycles, and the end of the Cold War, and it's sort of, you can almost periodize them. This one is different. The reason this one is different from all others is that during the buildup, we did not invest sufficiently in a next generation of capabilities. Mm. We bought MRAP. We bought a lot of stuff for Iraq and Afghanistan, which we all look at and go, where are we ever going to use that stuff again? But the Clinton administration was able to skate by on the investments of the Reagan. In the Reagan era, let's remember, we were building 240 F-16s, one type of aircraft alone, a year, actually acquiring 240. We are acquiring this year less than 100 of everything, not fighter planes, tankers, fighter planes, transports, and unmanned aerial vehicles. Okay, about a third of what the. So when you want to bring this force down, it's an old force. It's increasingly expensive to maintain. You have an industrial base. You can go back and think about in 1990, 91, how many defense companies there were, major defense companies. If you look at almost every major category, there are two: large aircraft, fighter plane, and in some cases, I'm sort of stretching the argument to say there are even two. We really have one company building nuclear ships / submarine 1.5. Right? So you go down the list; they're down. And if we consolidate further, we are going to go out of the business. We're in danger in a number of critical areas. And once you do that, Doug Feith was talking about sort of the issue of nuclear engineers and the experience. Great topic. British decided when they finished their last submarine program that they were going to not bother doing that anymore because they'll go back to industry a decade or 15 years later when they need the next one design work to be done and, find some nuclear people, find some ship engineers. How hard can this be, right? You did it before, we'll just... Okay, so they then tried to build, I think it was the Astute class. Couldn't do it. Had to come to the United States, had to borrow people from General Dynamics and what was then Newport News, Textron, one of these companies, I guess now HII, it's now Huntington Ingalls, because they had lost the design skills to design a nuclear attack submarine. Right? So when you want to talk about the design skills for nuclear weapons, let me tell you, a nuclear submarine is every bit as complex a piece of. It's not your family's car, okay? Advanced fighter aircraft composite materials. The list goes on and on and on. Once you don't do it for a decade, we can't build, Saturn-class boosters anymore. Don't know how to do it. Don't have the industrial base to do it. We buy engines from Russia. Right? So, do we really want to have that for the next ICBM, for the next fighter plane? I mean, where are you going to buy it from? I mean, the Chinese are going to be building it.
China.
Yeah.
Dan, last question quickly, and I don't mean this rhetorically. I'm very concerned that what we've seen of late is Republicans, even conservatives, embracing this idea that getting sequestration to reduce the deficit is more important than addressing the sorts of concerns that you've expressed. This is fundamentally a calculation, of course, that we need to save money. And I would just ask you, on the basis of both, the serious study you do of these things day in and day out, but also your historical analysis based on bust and boom cycles, as I think of them, and what usually attends them. What, in your estimation, Dan, is the likelihood that if we go down this route, set aside breaking the military altogether, just setting it back, hollowing it out, and then having to try to rebuild it, that we will wind up having to spend an awful lot more, not just in dollars, but in a currency that we actually prize more, and that is lives, for going this road if we do?
Unless you want to believe that peace will reign in the world, that we can count on North Korea, Iran, China, pick your country, not to do something crazy, that Egypt won't go over to the dark side even further. I mean, the list is going on. Unless you want to believe that, then I think history tells you that once the cork is out of the bottle, and we're the cork in that bottle, you have got to assume within a fairly short period of time that the world goes to hell in a handbasket, because there's no reason for it not to. And in fact, let me make it even stronger. With advanced weapons in their arsenal, even nuclear weapons availability for North Korea and Iran, U.S. pulling back, showing that we're less capable, we're not there. They'll read all the stuff that's going on on Capitol Hill. They'll read what the military is saying. How can they not test it? In fact, as a kind of one of these crazy states, rogue states, it is incumbent upon them to press the test. They're stronger, we're weaker. Great Satan is weaker. They've got to press the test. You are not just inviting conflicts and war and then a resurgence at great expense, you are making it, I think, inevitable, with more loss of life than you would have under current circumstances if you can deter it. If you can deter it, no loss of life. I mean, that's a hell of a trade-off between no loss of life and what we will see if we actually have to put North Korea or Iran back in the bottle.